Don't feel nervous?
No, not really.
All right.
I don't know what I'm doing, so that's probably why.
So I'm trying to think for the last couple of days, whatever. When was the first time I heard of the story of the Dungarvon Whooper? And I think it is, I have this vague memory of watching the old Ghostbusters cartoon. And so like any kid born in the 80s, I love ghosts and stuff like that. And I think it was my mom actually that said like, oh, dude, there's a story about a ghost from around here called the Dungarvon Whooper. And, it haunts the woods in Blackville. And I'm like, oh yeah, she's like, you should ask your father for more on that. So, because he was at work and, and he had known the story as well. Because again, my father worked in the woods all the time. And so this story about a ghost that's haunting the woods and there's a lumberjacks and a camp and all this involved is interesting stuff for him. And then it was finally like my grandfather, I got the full long version of the story. So of course, this is the folklore story with all sorts of things added to it. And we're going to do a deep dive on the Dungarvon Whooper here in just a moment. Creepy Dave, are we rolling? We're rolling. Creepy Dave says, all right. So here we are for episode 1 of Tell Me a Story. How's it feel, Shawn? This is my good friend. Of course, I am Tom Daly, and this is the doctor of history himself, Shawn McCarthy.
Yes, and greetings and salutations. It's going to be a great experience, and I cannot think of a better way of starting than with the most famous ghost story in all of New Brunswick, I contend.
That's it. And we are, of course, in Miramichi, New Brunswick at the moment, a tiny little province in the northeast corner. But this ghost story, you're going to find out, reaches quite far around the world, I would say. I lived out in Vancouver for a number of years, and I remember at a bar, one of those great conversations I had when I first got there was with a guy and saying, like, where did you come from? And I said, well, I'm actually from New Brunswick. And he said, well, I don't know anything about that province. We call it NB. Out here. And he's like, I think I heard a ghost story from there. Isn't it like a haunted ghost of a lumberjack that haunts your woods or something? I'm like, you're pretty close. That's amazing. You actually know that all the way out here. So we got to go back to the source material. Where does this story first appear? Of course, we believe it happened sometime in the late 1800s, but it's a fellow by the name of Michael Whalen, poet. Poet Whalen, the poet of Renouse, who put pen to paper and wrote it down.
That's right. And I mean, Michael Whalen, a very, very interesting figure. We've collected, dozens of his poems, but probably, hundreds that he wrote, as really somebody just doing it for recreation, unfortunately couldn't get a job, doing this full time, although I think that's really what he wanted. He tried to teach, he tried to do a lot of different things, but ended up just sort of as a clerk and and then kind of an itinerant poet.
So struggling to make it in the arts. We know all about that, don't we, Shawn and Dave? And that's really interesting because I'm related somehow, very distantly, to Michael Whalen. We never knew quite how, but my great-grandmother was a Whalen with the name spelled differently. There's lots of name spelling changes because we're hiding from something. My family's been hiding from something for years. So anyway, Michael Whalen would visit my great-grandmother and particularly her 2 sons. She had 3 sons altogether. One was my grandfather, and the other 2 were these bachelors who lived in the homestead, right? So one guy is a World War I veteran who comes home and immediately works in the woods. And the other guy is a farmer who everybody says looked like Freddy Krueger. So perfect audience to sell your poems to, am I right? So nevertheless, we know from working in the arts, who do you lean on when you want support? Friends and family, of course. So Michael Whalen would go there and my great-grandmother would tell her sons, buy his poems for God's sake, because we are related to him. And they did. They bought these books. I'm fortunate enough to have one right here. These are the little pamphlets that he would have sold door to door many, many years ago. I have it on a comic book board and bag. Yeah, it's dated 1928, so this predates Action Comics #1, the first appearance of Superman, by 10 years. So I'm not going to take it out there today, but I guarantee you this is the real deal. The Dungarvon Whooper, his most famous poem. This survived a house fire, actually, as a matter of fact. Yeah, a number of these did. So, and that goes to show, too, I guess it was important enough to my family that they were saving stuff like this. So, yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to dive into the Dungarvon Whooper. Shawn, you have an immaculate voice, and you have recited this poem to people from all around the globe over the years. It is the Dungarvon Whooper. It's a good one. So if you would do me the honors of reading it right now.
Sounds good. Far within the forest scene, where the trees, forever green, form a contrast to the beech and birches gray, where the snow lies white and deep, and the songbirds seem to sleep, and cease their sweetest singing all the day, where the mighty monster moose of limbs long, large, and loose, through the forest sweeps with strides both swift and strong, where the caribou and deer swim the brook so crystal clear, where the dark and deep Dungarvon sweeps along, where the black bear has his den far beyond the haunts of men, where the muskrat, mink, and marten fill the streams, where the squirrel, light and free, swiftly springs from tree to tree, and the lovely snow-white rabbit sleeps and dreams, where the sounds of toil resound far across the frozen ground, and 1,000 things that to the woods belong, where the saws and axes ring, and the woodsmen wildly sing, where the dark and deep Dungarvon sweeps along. Now in the lumber camp one day, while the crew was far away, and only boss and cook were in the camp alone, a sad tragedy took place, and death won another race, when that young cook swiftly passed to the unknown. From that day of long ago comes this weary tale of woe, the sad and solemn subject of my song, when that young cook drooped and died in his youth and manhood's pride, where the dark and deep Dungarvon rolls along. Now when the crew returned that night, what a sad scene met their sight. There lay the young cook silent, cold, and dead. From the belt around his waist all his money had been misplaced, which made the men suspect some serious wrong. Was it murder, cold and dread, that befell the fair young dead, where the dark and deep Dungarvon rolls along? Now when they asked the skipper why he had made no wild outcry, he turned away and hid his haughty head. The young lad took so sick, he died so awful quick, didn't have time to think, was all he said. Fast fell the driven snow, while the wildest winds did blow, till 4 feet deep it lay upon the ground, so that on that burial day to the graveyard far away to bear the corpse impossible was found. So a forest grave was made, and in it the cook was laid, while the songbirds and the woodsmen ceased their song, and the last farewells were said, o'er the young and lonely dead, where the dark and deep Dungarvon rolls along. Now when the crew returned that night, their dear comrades still they mourned, and the shade of night was falling over the hill. But all that long and fearful night all the camp was in a fright, such fearful whoops and yells the forest fill. Pale and ghastly was each face, we shall leave this fearful place, for this camp unto the demons does belong. Ere the dawning of the day we shall hasten far away, from where the dark and deep Dungarvon rolls along, and since that day, so goes the word, fearful sounds have long been heard around the place, where lies the woodsman's grave. Hoops! The stoutest heart to thrill, screams! The warmest blood to chill, brings terror to the bravest of the brave. And now till beside the grave did stand God's good man with lifted hand, and prayed that he these sounds would not prolong, that those fearful sounds would cease, and the region rest in peace where the dark and deep Dungarvon rolls along. Since that day the sounds have ceased, and the region is released from those most unearthly whoops and screams and yells, and around the Whooper's spring there is heard no evil thing, and around the Whooper's grave deep silence dwells. Be this story false or true, I have told it unto you, as I've heard it from the folklore all life long. So I hope all strife shall cease, and our people dwell in peace, where the dark and deep Dungarvon sweeps along.
All right. Thank you very much, Shawn. So that is the poem as Michael Whalen would have written it all those years ago. So again, very poetic language back in those days. Lots to unpack there.
No question about it.
Isn't there? So, in case you weren't listening really close, the story basically goes that there is this cook, correct, in the lumber camp. He has a money belt, and there's a lot of lumberjacks there who, probably don't have a lot of money. So, they are going off in the daytime to go work in the woods, and the cook would stay behind because he has to prepare the meal. He needs to have supper ready for when all those hungry guys come out of the woods. So they come out one day, and what's going on? Well, he's dead, and only the boss and him are the only two there. So immediately they start pointing fingers at the old boss, don't they?
That's right, yeah. Again, the only person in the camp, right? The cook didn't, assumingly didn't kill himself, of what happened. But I mean, sudden death in the camps was something that certainly did happen in those days and fairly often. I just did a very quick search and found the stories of 3 different individuals, reported in the newspaper who suddenly, died. So is it a case of murder? Is it a case of illness? Who can say?
A lot of guys, from what I heard, died from tuberculosis back then. That was very common, as well as the lumberman's disease. Have you heard about this?
Now, I
Not
have.
as sexy as it sounds.
Yeah.
No. It's not syphilis or anything, gonorrhea or nothing good like that. No. What in fact it is a cut on the palm of your hand, because I guess gloves weren't very popular. Gloves weren't invented back then, or the guys didn't have them, or whatever. And it was not uncommon to get cut by a rusty saw or an axe, or get a splinter in your hand, and that would fester away over time, and you get a bad infection, and that would be enough to do you in. So pretty tough times back then. But back to the story for a moment. In the poem, it says that he's died. There's no mark upon him. So, okay, it's not like the boss smashed his head in with a frying pan or anything like that. The money belt is gone. So we're pretty sure the boss took that. Then they have to bury him immediately because there's a big storm coming. So, and this is interesting too, because the story has been told so many times over the years. It doesn't say anything about being buried in a barrel or anything like that.
No, that's true.
And that's something that's entered the zeitgeist of the Dungarvon Whooper lately, has it not? Yeah, he's buried in a pork barrel. I think I've heard, next to the spring, because that's where, probably great for the water. They bury the dead body next to the spring, and
It's organic.
It is organic, yeah. And who doesn't like water with a dead body in it? So, yeah. And then the ghost starts howling and doing its thing because, it was buried in an unblessed grave. It terrifies all of the men there. And for years and years, they're afraid to go there and work in the woods. Right. And then, of course, Whalen gives a nod to I don't think he doesn't name him by name, but the man of God, the priest, who does go there to bless the grave. And we know who that priest is. We know of him from.
Yeah. So Father Edward S. Murdoch, who was the parish priest in Renews from, I think, 1912 on. I think maybe 1916, but I think 1912 he shows up, and I've heard, although I haven't seen it, that it's written actually in the parish register. He wrote out the day that he went and blessed the grave.
Okay. That's really cool, because for the longest time, people were trying to guess and figure out, did he go there? What did he do? Did he just simply say some prayers? Did he not go at all? Did he do the full rite of exorcism with the holy waters and all that sort of thing? So, it's hard to say. There's no, record saying that exorcism was performed, but we can use our imagination as to whatever he did. I'm sure it was a very old school blessing in those times, but it's good that you found out about that he actually did the blessing, because some years ago, I remember people saying, oh, he never actually went there. There's no record of it, or something. So the other interesting thing, I think, I don't know where this comes from, but the cook is never named in Whalen's poem, is he? But the story that we both heard, the name Ryan appears over and over, either as a first name or a last name. Do you have any idea where that came from, or what's going on there?
I can't say as I do. I've heard different versions of it. I think the only time I've ever seen it written out that would be old would be Dr. Sandy Ives from the University of Maine collected folk stories all through this area and into Maine, obviously. So I know it's written there a couple of times. A young cook by the name of Ryan. So that would have been in the 40s, 50s. So still a fair bit removed from the actual event itself.
Interesting. Yeah. Anyway, Ryan, as a last name, very Irish sounding. So we always were led to believe that this cook was from Ireland, and so there's a bit of, I find it interesting, we talked about this in the past too, is that the howling ghost, the big one you think of is the banshee from over there in Ireland. So you got to wonder, these lumberjacks, did that story somehow, the wailing, come from there? Did they incorporate that in some sort of way, or what's going on? But yeah.
The version of the story that I've recently found in 1881 one that takes place in Clearwater Brook about a woman who lost a child. And it's her, and she's the one that's doing the screaming. So that feels a little bit more in line with the Banshee story than,
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Because the Banshee, as far as I know, is a woman.
Yeah.
Unless it's the Marvel universe we're talking about. That's a guy.
But yeah, that's it. We see he also in 1844, so around the time, so about 10 years before Whalen was born, there's an infestation of wolves in Blackville, and there's a lot of complaints about the howling in the night and so on and so forth. So you wonder if there might be, again, that might be kind of a precursor of the story as well.
Interesting. Really interesting stuff. So yeah, and we'll flip back to Whalen again for a moment. The poem that you just read, Whalen has always reminded me of like an Edgar Allan Poe like character, because again, the Raven is the one that comes to mind. It's a dark poem, of course, and Whalen stuff. Dungarvon Whooper, I'd say, is probably the darkest one. Would you say? He's got a few others out there too, and it's interesting. The more you read about the guy, of course, Poe being an orphan and whatnot, Whalen loses his parents at a younger age. He also shares, same as Poe, they lose the woman they love. And I've heard that Whalen's life takes a dark turn after that. He loses his fiance, I believe. And after that, he's not the same man. He hits the bottle pretty darn hard, and he's in rough shape. And he dies in 1937. And on this cover of this book, we can see the bearded man there, Michael Whalen, but there's even some debate if that's Michael Whalen or not, isn't there?
Yeah. Yeah, there's some that say that that's his brother, that's not actually him. There's only one picture that seems to be unquestionably him, and he's kind of looking at the camera straight on, and he's got a little mustache. But yeah, that's it. I think the fur coat seems to kind of throw a lot of people. They say, oh, well, he would have never had enough money, to have a fur coat like that, a nice fur coat, so.
Interesting stuff. So yeah, the Dungarvon Whooper, probably the best known ghost story that we have here. And do you have any memories of being a kid, hearing it for the first time or anything like that?
First time I heard it was from my uncle. We were traveling to Moncton for something, and we were going along, along the railway tracks, and we were telling ghost stories, I guess, and he told me the story of the Hooper. Now, in his version, and I've heard this version many times too, it's not the boss, it's the cook who kills the cookee. That there's in a lot of those older camps, you had kind of the senior cook, and then you had kind of the young lad who would do all the fetching and carrying, and that it was the cook that killed the cookee, and the men then turned around and killed the cook.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So we got lots of murder in that story.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. So.
Interesting. I don't think I've heard that version. But I heard a version that there was a cookie for people who don't know, who's like the junior cook or the understudy to the cook or something like that. And so that's the guy that's died. So again, this story, it will not die, much like the ghost. It carries on even after the priest, Father Murdoch, does the blessing at the grave. Some people say, oh, that was the end of it. That was the end of the wailing. But other people say, oh, no, that there's still, to this day, there's still a howling ghost back there. It's far deep in the woods. Have you ever been there?
I've never been there. I've heard a lot about it. I've heard that it's murder to go back there in the summertime because the flies will carry you away. But yeah, I've had a lot of people mention about going back, but nobody's ever gone. At least not with me.
Yeah. And I know there's two springs back there too. There's like the Whooper Spring and there's the Dead Boy Spring.
That's right.
But I'm not sure. Do you know which is the actual spring?
I feel like it's the Hooper Spring, and I feel like the Dead Boy Spring is sort of like a kind of a false.
Yeah, that's right. You really think it would be the Dead Boy Spring, but it's not. No. So if you come to the Dead Boy Spring, you're not in the right place. You got to keep going. You just keep going until you get to the Whooper Spring, which is deep in the woods in Blackville. We're not saying you should go there. We will not be held liable if you go there and never come back. But by all means, check it out, because we're not telling you to, but just saying maybe you should check it out and let us know if you make it out alive.
That's true. Now, there's another version, and you may be able to confirm this if you go, that apparently that around the grave there is nothing living, but on the grave, like the grass and the flowers grow.
Okay.
I've read that different places as well. So
Interesting.
yeah.
Really, really cool stuff. Yeah. So again, this story, it's been part of us for so long. We remember going back as kids. We've been in plays about this, haven't we?
We have. That's right. The Legend of the Dungarvon Whooper, 17 shows or something? It was very popular in its day, from about 2007 to about 2010 or so. Yeah.
And I remember in 2000 and was it 2005? I think it was 2005. Outdoor Life Network came here and filmed, what was it called? Creepy Canada was the name of the TV show. And you might find it on YouTube if you actually go looking. And you might even recognize the guy playing the cook. So, yeah, it's not great. I won't get your hopes up. But, yeah, Canadian television from that time in the 2000s, it is what it is. And it was fun to be a part of and cool to see that. And as far as I know, I think that's the only TV production of that that's ever really been...
The only one I'm familiar with.
The only one I'm familiar with as well, too.
Now, Tom, you're going to have to, now, as I understand it, having watched it myself, you know what I mean, you were portraying another version of the story.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Would you care to share that?
Oh, absolutely. This one got me a lot of heat. I'm used to being in trouble. Yeah, so basically, the director and I guess the grips and everybody, it was a very small cast, told me the night before, like, yeah, we're gonna play with this one a little bit. So in our story, instead of burying his body next to the spring, they eat him. Oh, yeah. So basically what they do is the supplies are running low in the camp and the cook's not very good. So they do the only logical thing. They kill him and they eat him. And now come to think of it, this was filmed in like the late summer, early fall. There's no snow on the ground either. So, yeah, so obviously, you got to kill them. You got to kill them and eat them because you don't waste good meat back then, even if it's human meat. So, I was chopped up and fed to the people in a stew. And, so that got a lot of, people were mad. They thought I had something to do with it. I wrote the script and like, no. And so much so that a good old Canada Post immortalized that story on a stamp, did they not?
They did.
So, yeah.
They did. Not that long ago.
Not that long ago. Yeah, I remember that. They did a series of Halloween stamps. And the one from our part of the country, it was a guy standing over a pot with an axe, and there was a hand coming out of it, I do believe. So, yeah. Thanks, Canada Post. And
Tom Daly told him to do it.
Yeah. I'm not the reason people don't buy stamps anymore. Just saying.
That's right.
So the story, it's wild. And again, that's part of this folklore, isn't it? It gets told over and over again. It grows, it expands, it becomes something completely different. And I guess I have this book here, Monsters in the Fog, which I was reading through. And there is a story by a local lady, Allison Bowes is the name. So shout out to you, Allison, if you ever come across this podcast. It's a great little story called the Dungarvon Dinner. And it does, as you can guess, go somewhat in that direction or whatever, but I liked it. It's basically without giving too much away, the cook isn't very popular because of the hooping. He's doing the hooping before he's killed. Okay, he's doing that to wake them up. And I think that enters the story at some point, too. So he's doing the, woo! This is the Ric Flair of the first wrestling reference we've made. Yeah. So this guy's got a loud whoop that is waking people up, and clearly, some people don't take too kindly to it. So they're like, the food is terrible. It's one of the lumberjacks that loses his mind. And sorry to give away her story, but I'm just going to go and do it. Sure. And anyway, but you still should buy a book. And so basically they decide to do him in, and this one crazed lumberjack, figures he can make a meal out of them too, as revenge for just feeding them like boiled potatoes and salted cod and hard bread and all that. So, yeah. That's enough about that story. I guess we'll dump into the comic, huh?
Sure.
Yeah. So, what another piece of literature I have right here is, a comic book. It's by Dark Horse Comics. If you don't read comics, what is wrong with you? Dark Horse, one of the bigger independent companies out there. And this is Blue Book, issue 1, 1947. Now, the main book is about UFOs. Obviously, we got Rod Serling looking Mr. 1940s on the front with some UFOs, some creepy UFOs looking in the window like voyeur UFOs. Shown above the waist for obvious reasons.
Obviously.
Obvious reasons. So the comic is very blue, just like that. And Project Blue Book, of course, UFOs are indeed real, and we will prove that in podcasts to come.
That's right.
They are,
That's it.
The government was lying to you all along, folks. And
one of those aliens was also a voyeur here in Newcastle, but we'll get to that later.
oh, yeah. The aliens just... What if you had a chair? Imagine that. The alien in the cuck chair that's outside your window. Oh, yeah, just
floating?
Just the eyes. You see the eyes? Just like those huge black globes just watching you, cheering you on, telling you to go harder. He's only got 3 fingers on his hand, but he knows how to use them. So anyway, great comic, Blue Book, written by James Tynan, or Tinian. I don't know how to say his last name, and depending if you're in England, you pronounce it different than you do over here anyway. But whatever. James Tynan, great writer, one of the best ones in modern comics probably. He's written Batman, for God's sake. So, and then he's doing lots and lots of indie stuff. Something's Killing the Children's a great book, and I'm big fan of the Blue Book series. Why am I talking so much about this comic? Because in the back... after the alien story finishes, there it is, True Weird, the Dungarvon Whooper. And in black and white, which I do like, sets the mood, and it is a story about the Dungarvon Whooper, yeah. Not too long, maybe about 8 or 10 pages or so, but some really, really nice black pen and ink work going on there. So check it out. Again, this just came out last year. Comic book stores might still have it, or they can probably definitely order it for you. It's like a dozen different covers for it. So Project Blue Book, issue 1, 1947. A story from little old New Brunswick here in a comic that's published all across North America and even across the globe. Pretty cool stuff. Mm-hmm. So anything else from you, Shawn?
Well, I was going to kind of mention and kind of circle back to what you were saying about Vancouver. Old Angus, apparently a resident from here from all those many years ago, 1925, believed that the Whooper followed him from here to Vancouver.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, I know all about demons following you from here to Vancouver, so that's I do believe that. But yeah, that's really interesting because the story got out there somehow, and again, throughout the States, too. We're going to talk about that, not on this show, but on the next one, about his very likely American connections. Mm-hmm. So, any other ghostly roads we should go down here with this story, Shawn?
Maybe I've also read kind of like, what does the Whooper do? I mean, we often hear a lot of stories of like how the Whooper came to be, like, the origin story, if you will, but we don't hear an awful lot of haunting stories. At least I haven't.
That's true.
The only story that I've actually heard was this idea of, one night they're in the camp, they've come up in maybe the years after this murder occurred, and they can hear the screaming outside, and they won't even leave the camp. They're afraid to just even step outside the door. And I guess one lad who's, braver than the rest, so the story goes, who steps out and basically, kind of guards them as they all go to the outhouse.
Okay.
The screaming has loosened things up, and that's it. And so he starts then whooping back to the Whooper. And now what I've heard is that, of course, as you mentioned, the hoop is a thing that's known in the lumber woods. The cooks did it to wake everybody up, to bring everybody in, but lumbermen would also do it to kind of signal to one another, just to kind of orient themselves, right? So, the Whooper is supposed to hoop, and then people will hear that and think, there's a guy over there. So they hoop in return. So this guy starts hooping back and forth with the Whooper, and eventually goes off to see if he can find whoever this is that's doing the hooping. And night falls, morning comes, there's no sign of this guy. And as everybody's leaving, because they're so freaked out about this hooping, they see the guy's boots up in the tree.
Okay.
Yeah, they're hanging from the tree, and
wow,
he's dead.
Of course.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So
Yeah,
apparently, you get so close to the screaming that eventually it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. And then it claims you, and you become the next Dungarvon Whooper.
That could be.
Interesting stuff. Yeah, no, I'd never heard that story before.
Yeah.
But yeah, the boots hanging from the tree, the obvious symbol of lumberjacks who died in the woods back in those days. Now, if you see a pair of Converse sneakers hanging from a power line in Taintville, that means something else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
With the Tree of Souls on the 126.
Yes. Is it still standing? I think I heard.
One of the limbs is broken right off.
Okay.
But the tree itself, I think, is still alive.
Interesting. Yeah. So many souls filled that tree that actually a limb broke off it. Yeah. So if you're driving the 126, watch out for moose, but also watch out for the Tree of Souls. And a bunch of shoes hanging from a tree.
That's right.
Do you know the story behind that tree? Like, did somebody,
I'm not entirely sure.
Is it just a spooky looking tree, or is that tree actually, did that tree kill somebody, or?
I'm guessing, again, I'm just pulling this out of my ass, but I'm guessing it's probably a situation where something happened.
Something bad happened there, yeah.
And then, of course, everybody just kind of piled on and started throwing shoes in the tree,
Something happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
It's probably much the same as with the Hooper, right? I mean, it starts around this murder, but then you get all these different versions, and then you kind of get the tamed down versions. I'm sure you may have heard about, it's him tripping over sticks in the woods.
That version sucked so bad. I remember, we were in Nelson School, and some teacher or principal was the one that told us that story, and it was just, I told my grandfather about it, and he was just outraged. You know what I mean? That lying son of a... And so not the first time the education system will lie to you, correct, Doctor of History? And
This is true.
Yeah, but it's wild. And again, a thing these lumberjacks too. These are guys that are not going to be easy to scare. They were scary looking men. I've seen some photos taken in the 1800s, and there's one, shout out to Boys Town at the Woods Museum. There used to be, I was going through a book there, and just these guys just looking down the barrel of a gun. They're looking into that camera like they want to kill that photographer because he just took them away from work,
That's it.
And
they're not getting paid for this time.
No, and you can picture this guy with a bow tie, hair parted in the middle probably or whatever. Hi guys, I'm here to take your picture. And they just have this look like they want to kill him because they're not getting paid, by the hour. And as we know, Creepy Dave, it takes a long time to get set up, doesn't it? And even longer back then. So they're not easily scared of ghost whatsoever. So there might be something there for sure. And it's something I always point out to these guys, no criminal record checks whatsoever. So, yeah, there were some bad men in the woods back then. So easily you had to be able to look after yourself or somebody would take you apart.
That's it. And probably that's what happened to this young man, right? I mean,
that's true.
He's, just off the boat.
The boat.
Maybe not all that familiar with how things work, and figured you got a pretty good job here. Her cooking in the camps. He's inside. He's out of the cold.
Very true.
Yeah.
And they mention he's a good-looking guy. Even Whalen says that, doesn't he? In the poem there, in the language is very poetic, but it does mention he's fair. What is it? Fair skin, fair hair, something, or fair brow. It's that's it. So so it implies a good-looking face with a good head of hair. And you just picture these lumberjacks. These guys have been there for 10 years, just like they've been doing time in San Quentin. They've an eye missing. No teeth, and just boy, you're gonna die. And wild, crazy times. But it means so much to this part of the country because it is, like I said, my father worked in the woods all his life, and his father before him, and everybody has, it's just there. It is the most New Brunswick story you could possibly encounter. Yeah. Am I forgetting anything, Sean? Anything else we should add to this before we wrap it up?
I don't believe so. I think that's pretty much everything. Obviously, with not very many stories of hauntings. There are a lot of stories of, what the Whooper is. And obviously that's something that we're going to explore in future episodes. So, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So wherever you are, if you're in Miramichi or New Brunswick or anywhere across the globe, if you happen to click on this video and watch it, thank you very much. Reach out in the comment section if you've ever heard any stories about the Dungarvon Whooper, or drop us a line. We'd love to hear it if you have a version. But we're not done yet. We're not done with this story because, as Shawn just implied, there's more to it than just a ghost. We'll be back for episode 2, and we're going to ask the question, what if the Dungarvon Whooper wasn't a cook who was killed in the woods and a howling ghost? What if it was a man with severe mental illness, a real man that lived in the woods for years and years and years and did not want anyone to find him?
That's it. How dangerous would a guy like that be?
Pretty damn dangerous, I'm guessing. Yeah. So we'll be back with episode 2 in a week's time. We'll talk all about that guy and about his connections to possibly. Should I hint at it now?
Sure, you go right ahead. Yeah.
Even connections all the way from Blackville to the good old American South. The South, the Dixie Line. He's involved in the Civil War.
That's right.
We think. Possibly.
Yep.
So that's pretty cool. One other thing, I guess, should we give away the big secret? Of course, we do a lot of theater. Character Matters Miramichi is a company Shawn and myself founded a couple years ago. And we have a tour, the Dare the Dark Headless Nun Tour, the other big ghost story of this area. But coming for the first time ever in 2025, we're going to be doing a tour based around
the Dungarvon Whooper, yes, indeed. So Dare the Dark gets just a little bit bigger in 2025, with the Dungarvon Whooper Tour. Every Saturday, July and August, taking place at the Blackville Community Park on Main Street. So, it'll be an hour-long tour. You buy your tickets at the Visitor Information Center, $15. So we're really excited to be able to bring that forward in partnership with Miramichi River Valley, the municipality.
That's great. Awesome, Shawn. So everybody's watching, thank you so much. Please like and subscribe, hit the bell, do all those good things, because if you don't, the Dungarvon Whooper will find you, and you will never stop howling.
Yeah. Just like that.
Thanks, everybody.